Okay, very good. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm here with Charles, and we're going to discuss some of his theory. He has some theory on kind of cultural philosophy, particularly around the difference between honor cultures and dignity cultures. I think I saw you on some other YouTube channel a few months
That's
back,
fun.
and yeah, on Alex Mershak's channel, yeah. And I thought, yeah, I'm very interested in the kind of thematic, psychopolitical, psychological, and cultural phenomena. So whenever I see anything related to this, I always try to kind of note down who's talking about it and what where they're coming from. So I definitely picked up on on your interviews on YouTube, and I thought this was very interesting. So I read your Substack piece on this, and I thought, yeah, I'd reach out and arrange a little conversation about it. So thank you for coming on. And do you want to maybe just we'll just do like a little introduction? Like, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and to say why uh what motivated you to think about these cultural issues related to honor and dignity?
Well, it goes back to the fact that all my life I've been interested in complex problems. And uh, I can tell you about a couple of them just so you have an idea of where I'm coming from. When I was a kid, 8 years old, I was protege to a nationally known scientist. She was on the team that grew the first plant from a single cell. And I told her that I had an idea about what kinds of memory there were. And I told her I thought it was chaining and itemizing. And she feigned falling off her chair and said, "You've just repeated some of James Lang's theories." And so that was my introduction to doing theoretical work. And then about 20 years ago, I was interested in number theory, and I had always had an interest in the repeating decimal repeating fraction of 1/7, which is 142857. 142857 repeating. And you get the idea that there are sevens involved in that. So 14 is 2 times 7, 28 is 4 times 7, and 56 would be 6 times 7. But the actual number is 5/7 instead of 5/6. So are the sevens really what counts, or what's the deal with that 7? So it turns out that Wittgenstein had the same interest in that same very number, and he had the same question: why is it 7 instead of 6 if it looks so much like multiples of 7? So he couldn't figure it out, but I figured it out and uh, determined that it was a carryover. And I sent my proof to Robert Fuller, who had written a textbook on mathematics for physics. And he told me that it was an honest to goodness proof. He said that it had since been done by other mathematicians by a different method, but he said mine was adequate. So stuff like that it has always interested me. And so when I was in college, I was reading Nietzsche while I was trying to get out of college in a hurry. I didn't particularly like the system of study, and I thought I could teach myself better. But anyway, I wanted to abbreviate it to 3 years. So at the end of my freshman year, I had junior standing. I'd passed out of that many classes. Uh, and in the middle of passing out all those classes, I was reading Nietzsche, The Birth of Tragedy. And I noticed that he said that the lyrics in the Greek tragedies were part Dionysian and part Apollonian. And I could understand that quite well. But when he was applying it to human beings, in his earlier career, at the time he was doing the uh, the tragedy examination. Uh, uh, where was I? He was saying that Wagner was the Dionysian par excellence. He didn't mention that there was any Apollonian in him. He was talking about Goethe as an Apollonian and criticizing it. But by the time he wrote The Gay Science, he had changed rather remarkably. And he had come to realize that he had to have both of those within each individual. So now he apologized in The Gay Science directly to uh, directly to Goethe and said that Goethe was by and large an Apollonian and that that was a good thing. So he changed his pitch quite a lot in the intervening years between doing The Birth of Tragedy and The Gay Science. But I decided I could come up with a better typology for culture, and I started reading up on it. And there was nobody that I had made contact with or read who would even have dignity and honor in the same sentence, except for one source, and that was Peter Berger. This was back in 1970. Peter Berger was the first person I ever saw who put those two words in the same sentence. Then about 30 years later, I found out about Orit Kamir, an Israeli scientist who had also put dignity and honor in the same sentence. And she had done an examination of the film Unforgiven by, let's see, it was, who was the director, a famous director. He's 90 some years old now. Uh, shoot, his name escapes me. But she did a very interesting job of analyzing that film. The film was about a person who started out being honor based and wound up being dignity based through the process of the movie. And she wrote up a 40-page article that came out in a journal that I happened to have access to. And so I read her article and I was fascinated by that. And she indicated a lot of things that I was finding out in my reading of anthropology. I wound up reading hundreds of between books and journals, hundreds of them, to do some background research on this. But I thought that honor and dignity was an archetypal format for studying culture instead of Apollonian Dionysian. Ruth Benedict, who came up with the shame guilt theory in her book Chrysanthemum and the Sword, uh, she she had also experimented with the Apollonian Dionysian uh, pair for examining a few cultures in the United States, Southwest and North Pacific Coast regions. And the Zuni, she said, were Apollonian, and the Quackatl was in the North Pacific Coast area. She said that was Dionysian. Well, that didn't. There were some commonalities there, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I thought that honor and dignity were a good archetypal pair because everything else came under them. There wasn't anything else that went over honor and dignity that I could see. So I decided to work with honor and dignity. So that's how that came about. I was trying to solve another complex problem.
Yeah, yeah, good, good. Very good introduction. It's interesting how you came from kind of mathematical background, problem solving, and then applied that into the social sphere. It's almost quite Platonic because Plato
Yeah.
always emphasized geometry and math, and I was thinking, well, maybe there's a an attempt to find a balance or something within geometry and math, an equation, a fitting a kind of balance between two different forces. So perhaps there's something there of a an attempt
Yeah,
to
and that's
find a
not
kind
the
of
only mathematical deal that I did. I did another one on the square roots, and they're all said to be irrational. And I proved that they're not as irrational as as is claimed because I could show a definite pattern to them.
Mhm. Okay,
And
good, good.
I haven't shown that to any mathematician. Well, I showed it to a couple of mathematicians, but I haven't heard back from them. But that is significant in number theory. That there's evidence that they're not as irrational as one might have thought. The patterning starts with the equation for phi, the golden ratio.
Okay, good. All right, well, cool. So I won't go too far into the math stuff because I'm really a complete ignoramus when it comes to like math and geometry. But um, yeah. So I googled the film also. It's Clint Eastwood, I think, Unforgiven.
Yeah, Clint Eastwood. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, yeah. So very very sort of a kind of manly kind of film. Definitely an expression of sort of what I would call phimotic kind of character. Resilience, overcoming, justice, and so forth. Um, okay, so let's maybe go into the theory a little bit of honor dignity. So yeah, I read the Substack piece, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but it seems very much like you're the one of the key characteristics between honor and dignity is the dignity is more innate and universal, and honor is more particular. And I would like I'm not so sure like how far it's innate or external, but it's more bound to social custom and to social recognition and to social status and so forth. Whereas it seems like dignity is more kind of internal, it's more introspective, and it's also more universal. Like, is that a good
That's a good
summary?
overview.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so because dignity is universal and innate, respect is due to everybody in one sense or the other. That's a direct consequence of that. And once you've decided that everybody has respect coming to them, now you have to talk about rights because that's the next thing that's logically available through an approach to dignity for everybody. If everybody has to be respected, they're respected in certain ways, and those ways in which they're expected are what we call rights. So with an emphasis on dignity, you have an emphasis on human rights. And an example of human rights are those that were compiled in the United Nations Declaration of Rights of 1947, I believe it was. Uh, the honor-based, being collectivistic, as you mentioned, kind of settled into traditional styles of life and living, and they still do to this day. Traditional being they rely on tradition and carry it forth, and the collectivism is very linked very strongly with that. The family is together, and the family has brings out a lot of these aspects of tradition. So they have long memories of distant relatives several generations back. It was typical for archaic societies to remember 7 generations back, very common, and those were collective organizations, of course. So uh, that has continued into the present, where there isn't they don't go back 7 generations, but they certainly go back 3 or 4, and that's more than what I have done. My parents were both single children, so I don't even have any cousins. So it was just me and my brother. Uh, and we have no recollection beyond our grandparents. I
Hmm.
met my great grandfather on his deathbed. And that was about it. That's all. That's all that we got there. He was an immigrant from Germany, Herrman, and then he changed the spelling of it to be more American, Herman. Does that answer your
Yeah, yeah, perfect. Yeah,
question?
great. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, so you mentioned the kind of international sorry, the UN Charter and the post-war. And I was thinking this is so relevant because I think we're going through a crisis at the moment of geopolitical kind of
Oh yeah, yeah, we
sensibilities
sure are. Yeah,
that have a lot to do with the sort of structure of the post-war kind of universalistic, very dignity-based, it seems, kind of
yeah,
understanding,
yeah,
and then
yeah, yeah.
they're being disrupted by forces that are maybe sort of
Yeah,
kind of like repressed honor traits, sort of pushing back, maybe or something. I'm not
yeah,
sure, but
yeah. That's one way to put it. There's no question the honor-based people did not like the extent to which the dignity-based people were pushing them, and they considered it pushing, and they considered it that it was a danger to their culture. The honor-based are very strongly attached to their culture, and they will defend it with everything. Uh, One of the things that well, I'm going to talk about the Russian-Ukraine issue and the Israeli-Palestinian issue. but that I was doing that in connection with a different question that you asked somewhere down the line.
Okay, no worries. So I was just the question um that I had kind of thought about for this part would be just a kind of like a basic geographic and historical schema. Like were all societies more honor based, let's say 500 years ago? Are dignity societies newer? Is it kind of an expression of modernity and enlightenment, or were, for example, Western or Anglo societies always dignity based, even going back to like, 500 years ago, six, seven, 800? Like, is there a historical
A little of
shift in
both.
general?
A little of
Okay.
both. Uh, the first dignity-based societies were Greece and Rome, and they were dignity-based only for a short period of time. Greece was dignity-based during the miraculous century, where you had Aristotle, Plato, and the tragedians and so forth. Uh, uh, that that was short-lived, but uh, uh, trying to remember this guy's name, Joseph Campbell, in one of his books on heroes, uh, had said that when the Indo-Europeans entered Greece, they entered in with dignity. And I think what he meant by that was that the result of that was going to be dignity-based culture, and it was for a period of time. Then Rome had their own charter of rights that started probably 500 BC, roughly, um, and they developed that, and most of the people they conquered were accorded uh, those rights, and it was a token of of prestige to have Roman citizenship. Uh, St. Paul was very pleased at his Roman citizenship, for example. Uh, then you have after Greece and Rome, you have England of the basically the 11th, 12th century, the era of the Magna Carta. But this had been developing through the country, and it just came to a head in the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta, of course, didn't give everybody rights, but it gave it gave an example of what could happen by giving rights to the nobility. But then over time, the rights to the nobility became the rights of the public as a whole, and those were dignity based. So England came before anybody else, and the rest of them were Enlightenment babies. They came with the Enlightenment period. Western Europe came with the Enlightenment, and then all of England's colonies that became nation states uh, uh, from the Enlightenment on to the present. Uh, those were all also dignity based. So that's the story on that.
Okay, good. And like the current setup of like 2026, like where is the division now? Is it like basically the Western post-war order is
Yeah,
dignity based, and then the rest are
yeah,
honor?
yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, if you count out the populations of the states, the dignity base takes up 10% of the world. 90% is honor based.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay,
But
very
the
good.
10% has done quite a lot in the world.
Yeah, yeah. Good. So I
I'm
do
sure
want
there's
to
some-
bring up Germany in this historically, but I'm going to leave that for a little bit later. Um, First, I want to maybe go a bit more into the characteristics of the honor and dignity schema. Um, so I think I have a quote here from your essay. I think it says, "Honor is characteristically earned through public esteem, but pragmatic dignity arises from a silent praise, or sorry, the silent praise of others, and from the self in witnessing an efficient and effective use of one's abilities in achieving acceptable goals." Um, so what I kind of thought from that was like, there's definitely two things we could look at here. There's a kind of a difference of substance, like what is the substance of this thing, called dignity or called honor. There's a kind of distinction in like this kind of substance in the character of people, but there's also a difference of expression, like how it's expressed, um, how a sense of honor or a sense of dignity is expressed. The dignity culture seemed to be more introverted or internally orientated, we could say, and more sort of humble and more kind of quieter. And then you have a kind of loudness or a kind of brashness, or a kind of publicness of the honor um, cultures. So I just wanted to, I don't know, like
You're,
just
you're,
a
you're
very general
completely,
question of like how that, like what implications does that have for these distinctions in general?
yeah. Well, your characterization was right on target. You hit the nail in the head. Uh, the ultimate uh, issue that has come from that description is basically the problem that we have internationally right now. Uh, the dignity-based people were going too fast for the honor-based people, and this has created a pushback from the conservatives in most all the countries. The Eastern European countries dealt with the problem first by holding immigration, and um, I'm told that there are serious problems with it in England because the population, the immigrant population, is not assimilating very well, and who knows what will have to have happen there. In the United States, uh, our president is basically just going around and picking out all the immigrants he can and sending them back south. So I don't know whether England's going to have to do that or not, or France. But Germany seems to be doing a little bit better. Angela Merkel was okay with taking in a lot of people because she said that Germany had a severe labor shortage. And I don't know whether that has any influence on how things are going over in Germany now. You'd know more about that than I do. Um, but this whole honor dignity basis is where things are at, and it's where things are going to go. And if we have a war, it will be between honor-based and dignity-based countries, uh, China and Russia against the United States and Western Europe. Uh, it would be a conventional warfare because nobody wants to use nukes, but it would not be pretty in any event. Uh, a fellow named Samuel P. Huntington wrote a book 15, 20 years ago, I guess, somewhere in that area, called The Clash of Civilizations. Maybe you have heard of that book. He
Mm,
uh,
yep.
and civilizational areas. He developed areas of this and that civilizations, and then discussed the fault lines between them, and said that that's where the uh, the the hot wars were, even though they might be small skirmishes, they were still hot wars. He called them, and he said that all along the borders between Muslim and non-Muslim countries was the richest example of that. There were 29 of those locations where where there was a hot war, in ongoing hot war, and so he said that that would be one of the ripest areas for a conflagration in the case that it came to a full clash of civilizations. Uh, I agree that there can be a clash of civilizations. I just don't believe that it is necessarily Muslim versus non-Muslim. I think it's honor dignity based. It won't be just the Muslims that are attacking us. It will be China and Russia as well,
Mhm.
and that's because they're all honor based.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So this is why this theory I think is quite interesting and prescient because we do have a move, I think, in the past few decades away from, let's call it the kind of Fukuyama vision of, well, we're all going to enter into a kind of liberal end of history sort of political and social sensibility. And then you've got this other view, which is like, no, we're going to become, in some sense, more pluralistically kind of antagonistic towards each other. You know, there's going to be distinct civilizational forces that are going to sort of emerge back kind of towards the surface. They've kind of been pushed down a little bit by forces of, I think, global industry and international law and technology and so forth. But they're still there in some sense, and they will eventually emerge again. So that's and that does sort of seem to be what's happening at the moment, I think. Um, yeah. So I don't know if you I can move on to the next question, but I don't know if you have any other comments on that.
Well, I would like to ask you if you agree with me that the problem is basically between honor and dignity based countries, the clashes that we're having.
Yeah, I think yeah, I definitely think there is a lot of truth to that. I definitely think that the kind of post-war order expressed itself in a very sort of kind of fast and often quite aggressive sort of dignity-based sensibility about human rights and so forth. And we've sort of expanded
Yeah,
the the notion of human rights. Like, I suppose one of the more pragmatic dignity ideas would be to get human rights and to actually like reevaluate them and think, well, what did they apply to and how far can we push them? Like, it's very common in the past few decades, particularly the past 2 decades, to have things like human rights being expanded to things like animals. You know, it's not even just human anymore, it's animals or
yeah,
it's inanimate
yeah.
objects.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's not even
There's a limit that this can go, and that's what I mean by the slippery slope. Dignity gets on a slippery slope, and then it needs guardrails, and there
mm,
are no guardrails right now. The
mm,
guardrails should be the law on the one hand, or conscience on the other, or when it comes to aspersions between one another, uh, getting rid of those by enjoining competition in the field of thoughts and use use uh, competition to determine whose ideas are better, and then try going with some of those ideas rather
mm,
than have to put up with a slippery slope, which is what we've been doing. The United States had perhaps the clearest example of it in the cancel culture.
mm. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I think
that
the
started out being a noble effect that they saw bullying going on the college campuses. Uh, Jews were being picked on, for example, and they decided that this kind of language, the bullying language, was not satisfactory. And over here, you have to remember that universities are in loco parentis. They take over for the parents for the kids that are under 21 years of age. And
yeah.
so they have to take into consideration what the kids' parents are going to think of these policies. And parents are not very happy about their kid being bullied at school. And this program started out on a good basis. They were supporting the parents and the disenfranchised students who were being picked on
Mm,
because of their race or their creed. And there were limits set on what language you could use that was not that was defamatory. You couldn't use defamatory language
mm,
on the university campus. Well, that got a little bit carried away, to say the
mm,
least.
yeah.
All of a sudden, people were calling out, where's my free speech rights?"
Mm,
And
yeah.
that clarion call took over, and then we had a basic war between the free right speech advocates and the university advocates. And now the university is losing out because of uh, President Trump's policies.
Yeah.
There's been significant conservative pushback with the help of the president.
Yeah.
Uh, he's gone after some of these colleges, threatening to take away their federal funding if they don't install some brakes.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Now it's interesting that you bring up the free speech because I do think the free speech issue because I do think that's a good example of where this kind of fixation on human rights has really gotten out of hand because it's like you can't legislate legally against things which are experienced subjectively. Like if you say things and I feel offended about that, like
Yeah,
you can't really legislate that because it's subjective. So anyone could just say, well, I'm offended by this, and it's just for very personal reasons, or it's ideologically motivated. You
Right.
can't have like an enlightened,
Yeah.
kind of impartial legal
It
system.
was a slippery slope ready to be
Yeah,
used.
yeah, exactly.
And
So
dignity went right down that slippery slope.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned the kids being, because I've always thought this about universities. One of the reasons universities are hotspots for these issues is because you have young kids who probably live with their parents their whole lives, and they're suddenly away from their parents, and they're
Feeling their
um
oath.
yeah, and then you have the university acting like parents, as you said, and then there's a sort of failure to kind of distinguish between the kind of anthropology of that and between the legality of that. It's like they're
Yeah.
trying to come up
Yeah.
with legal codes to control behavior, where really what's happening is you got young people who are not used to being exposed to the world, suddenly being exposed to the world, and that's a kind of psycho-developmental phenomena. It's not really something you can legislate under human rights
Yeah.
notions. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of failure just to, I think, even just reflect upon these issues coming from dignity cultures. They kind of they sort of become very arrogant. Like they don't want to reflect upon their own sensibilities and think where they're appropriate or not, where they're going too far or not. They're kind of
Yeah.
they're kind of caught into their own
They got high on their horses and they
yeah,
couldn't look back.
yeah, kind of high on their own supply, you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, So let's move on. So I'll say one more thing, actually, just to give dignity cultures a little bit of credit. They do seem to encourage introspection. Like you say, the Greece and Rome went through a period of dignity cultural phenomena, and I suppose like you do see where people become a little bit more reflective and philosophical, that perhaps dignity cultures are asserting themselves a little bit, because if you're introspective and you're thinking innately, there's a kind of necessity that one might remove themselves from social customs or from, let's say, sensibilities about status. You might kind of extract yourself from that and kind of be not individualistic in the modern sense, but just sort of um, start to cultivate a kind of emotional and moral sensibility, which is maybe a little bit more individualistic. Um, but the problem I have with like contemporary dignity cultures is that they seem to have lost that capacity too. Like they seem to have
Yeah.
lost the capacity to reflect, like the good things of dignity cultures, to
Yeah.
reflect introspections, a kind of maybe a more mature self-consciousness. They've sort of lost those.
Yeah.
Can
I
I put it
just read
that?
an article that came out in the Atlantic magazine that really went to the heart of a lot of that stuff. Right? It was a kind of brilliantly written article, and the Atlantic is a very good journal. They're left leaning, but they put on a lot of conservative stuff too. So it's a pretty
Mm,
good journal, and
yeah.
they ripped the universities to pieces.
Mm, yeah. Good, good. Okay. So next topic, I want to go because you also
By the
kind
way,
of
could I
ground.
mention something else about
Yeah, yeah,
dignity?
yeah, yeah. Go ahead, go ahead.
Uh,
Yeah.
there are two kinds of dignity. The dignity that starts with this business of respect for everybody. That's what I call idealistic dignity.
Mhm.
The dignity that was in what you quoted me, that was pragmatic dignity.
Yeah, yeah.
That pragmatic dignity is that I have a saying that all dignity is quiet dignity, and if it's not quiet, that you have to have a reason for it, and
Yeah, well,
that's pragmatic dignity that I'm talking about when I say that.
well,
So it's necessary to keep those two dignities distinct.
okay, okay. So we've got like a distinction within the distinction too. Um, so it's interesting that you mentioned that too, because another thing I've noticed about contemporary idealistic dignity is that it's not that quiet. It's quite loud. You know, it's quite performative and quite loud. And I've noticed
Yeah,
that it's almost like they've sort of taken certain traits from what you would typically characterize as honor societies, where people are more sort of socially performative or socially, or kind of they're more invested in a kind of social role or social conventional sense of status and so forth, and they're more invested in sort of extracting it from that social sphere. And I think maybe also social media has done this to dignity cultures because it's sort of given a very performative and very sort of public sensibility, but it's kind of given those to not to like honor-based people, but it's given them primarily, at least at first, to dignity cultures. Because so you have what's called virtue signaling, and I think that's an interesting term because it's like signaling
Yeah.
means that you're really concerned about what other people are thinking and how people perceive you the whole time. And I suppose a classical dignity culture may not be so concerned with that. They would say, look inward at your own soul and uh your own individual value. Don't be so caught up in these sort of superficial externalities. But nowadays, you know, the most dignity-based people seem to be the most caught up in these superficial externalities. So there's a perhaps a little bit of a contradiction in not a contradiction in the theory, but just a sort of a social phenomena, uh, which is worth noting, I suppose.
Yeah. Very
Okay,
true.
so let's go to the other. So you also based this theory in a distinction within Rome, which was Stoicism and Epicureanism, right? So I
Uh,
th that was interesting. I don't know much about Epicureanism. I know a little bit about Stoicism, but I never thought of these two things being um, in tension with each other. So could you elaborate on that a little bit?
I wonder if you'd allow me to read a couple paragraphs
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wrote in one of my papers.
yeah. Go ahead.
All righty. The Stoic view of the world equates roughly to the dignity-based view. Every man is a citizen of the world. All men are due the respect we would accord to one's friends. The Stoic is more of a serious man, aware of his duties and offices at all times. He is rational, as or more rational than the Romantics accuse the Enlightenment folks of being. For him, the object is, according to Pierre Hadot, quote, to act in a programmed, rational manner as a part of the whole formed by the city of those beings which share in reason, unquote. The Stoic acknowledges the importance of being an active member in the community. These are some few of the many traits of dignity. The Epicurean view of things is based on avoidance of what is bad or hurtful and recognizing the pleasure of delving into the mysteries of the universe. The Epicurean family's values family above all else and avoids politics, unlike the Stoics. Also, unlike most Stoics, the modern Epicurean father, if we can imagine a modern Epicurean, would hide his thieving child from the authorities, whereas the modern Stoic person would give the benefit of the doubt to the authorities provided from the public. And there's a case of a Muslim father turning in his son for uh, uh, be, trying to become a, a Unabomber, and so he wasn't able to do that because his father turned him in, and that was a very dignity-based thing to do. Um, the Epicurean values community rather than a Stoic tendency of modern times towards individualism. The Epicurean is fun-loving and engages with his fellows regularly. That's very honor-based. He is a traditionalist in most matters. That's honor-based. Whereas the modern Stoic person might acknowledge the value of progress and of science. The Epicurean traits are indeed honor-based traits. Despite the overriding difference in world preferences, the dignity-based, comprising but 10% of the world population, have been the most progressive, successful, and powerful, though the honor-based groups are growing in strength as witnessed the comparative progress of Iran, Russia, and China over the last century.
Yeah,
Anyhow,
yeah.
I hope that
Good,
answers your
good.
question.
Yeah, that brought up a lot of different topics. Yeah, so it's an interesting example that you give with the father who has to decide whether or not to protect his son in the face of um the potential, you know, punishment from authorities and so forth. Um it's interesting because like there are examples within, for example, Plato, where Socrates will say, you know, like something like if someone is being fundamentally like unjust in some way, they should be exposed to accountability and judgment, even if it's within your own family. And also,
Yeah.
you have the passage in the Bible where Jesus is says to his disciples, um, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's something like, only people who turn against their mother and father are my true followers, right? So there's a kind of,
He was an anti-conventional theorist in a certain sense of the word. He also
mm,
said, "Let the dead bury their dead,"
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was the same passage
meaning
where he
let the
said,
dead in spirit bury
mm,
their dead.
okay, yeah, yeah, but it was the same passage where he said, I don't come to bring peace on earth, I bring the sword. And then he
Yeah,
says, only people who are, because he said, like, I'm here to turn, was it like mother against daughter or father against son or something like that. So there's this really sort of antagonism to the
yeah.
family
He's almost
order.
saying, I'm a dignity-based person here to upset your honor-based culture."
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it seems a fundamental aspect of that is kind of whether or not your family is is whether or not you're willing to expose members of your family to like larger senses of social accountability and justice. It seems like that's something dignity-based cultures
Uh,
have
Honor-based
done
cultures are
better.
not very good about either transparency or airing their dirty laundry,
Yeah,
whereas
yeah, yeah.
dignity cultures don't have a problem with that. And in fact, dignity-based cultures take it as an equivalence. In other words, if you can air your dirty laundry, you can avoid to be transparent.
Hmm.
And so they're kind of the same thing. Airing the dirty laundry is essentially your way of saying that I can be transparent and I have a duty to be transparent.
Okay, yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And it's also, so I would say that the honor problem could sometimes lead to nepotism and corruption,
Yes,
because if you're
it
not
does.
willing to expose your family members to like larger forms of
Yeah.
external social accountability, then there's a tendency to just like cover everything up for them and let them get away with it. So that might be one explanation to why dignity-based cultures have set up social systems which people feel at least are more just and more accountable and more fair, because they don't have such a problem with people saying, well, yes, this is my family member or someone from my kin, but they have committed a crime and there is a rule for that. So sorry. Um, but having said that, you can then go to the honor cultures, and then you can say, that there's a certain tendency perhaps for dignity cultures to be a bit too obsessed with social codes and social rules that sort of disturb collectivity and social function. Because
Right.
you said the characteristics of honor people are like they're very sociable and kind of fun loving. I think
Yes.
I said sociable in my notes, but you definitely said fun loving. And you do see like, problems with reproduction of birth gaps now, people not having children. That's not exclusively dignity cultures, but it does seem to emerge within the kind of
Yeah,
universal.
it is basically dignity based.
Yeah,
It's been associated with economic progress,
yeah,
but the economic progress is really a function of a dignity based approach to things.
yeah, yeah. So you do see advantages and disadvantages to both. Is there any so perhaps we can go into one interesting example that was I was gonna say is which is quite counterintuitive, because in some sense dignity cultures are more fair when it comes to rules, and they're more I would say they're maybe a bit more tolerant towards like accountability and the kind of necessity of accountability within a society. But one thing you said, which is quite interesting, is that they're more punitive and they're less geared towards restorative justice, where honor societies are actually more less punitive and more restorative,
That's right.
justicely orientated, which is counterintuitive because you would sort of think, well, we have human rights and we have more rule of law, and we have all this stuff, and that means we're not going to be punished so much. But actually, that's not what
It's
you're
a
saying.
case of dignity going down the slippery slope again, and
Yeah,
that's a detriment to our that's a stain on our dignity based record. There's no reason for us not to be restorative in our approach to justice. There's no reason to have the capital punishment at all. That doesn't comport with dignity, and it is incredibly rare in honor-based societies to have capital punishment.
Mm,
China is probably the only, uh, well, certainly the only major, but probably the only remaining honor-based country to have capital punishment. I don't know of any honor-based countries that have capital punishment except for China. Maybe
mm,
I just don't know enough about particular countries, but I haven't heard of anyone having capital punishment except for China.
mm. And why is that? Like, what's
I guess you could say Iran has capital punishment. They're even thinking about executing some of those protesters.
mm,
So
mm.
Iran would have to be added to that list.
I suppose the distinction there might be something like I think countries like China or Iran you would use capital punishment to punish people that they would see as enemies rather than their own people. Like, the communist China revolution, it started to punish it, like execute like billionaires or something, or people that they see or that are exploiting the entire country. And then in Iran, they might execute people that are seen as like agents of Western uh, subterfuge or something. So perhaps
Yeah,
they're like
that's what
they're
they would call it anyway.
yeah, like so their kind of sense of killing you is more like you're a traitor. It's not like you've done something bad. Whereas in the US, um, it's like, if you get death penalty because you've done a rape and a murder, it's like you're not necessarily like a traitor to the country or to the nation. You're just a bad person. So it's maybe
Yeah.
that's the difference. But, um, yeah, but that's an interesting distinction. And it is quite counterintuitive and quite surprising for people to hear. But I think it does make some sense because I have noticed in the recent past again, kind of dignity culture is becoming quite punitive and becoming quite quick to punish people and quick to um label
But just think of
people.
cancel culture. Just think of cancel culture. This is the
Yeah, exactly.
same psychology.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. Okay. I move on to my other questions. Okay, yeah. Well, we can talk about Germany now, actually. Yeah, we'll talk about Germany for a little bit.
Sure.
Because you also have some writings on Nietzsche, and obviously Nietzsche is very relevant to these issues because Nietzsche is, it seems to me, certainly someone who seems to be a little bit nostalgic or defensive of honor cultural traits.
And he's
And
very much an honor-based person.
yeah,
He's got a lot of
and
honor-based traits.
yeah, that like it's clearly there. So Germany's a strange example in all this because as far as I understand what you wrote, they are now a dignity-based culture. They've been incorporated into the dignity network.
In
Um,
fact, they have incorporated dignity into their legal system.
yeah, yeah, but they were honor before World War II, right?
Yes, they were honor-based, but they had been becoming dignity-based for about a century before World War One.
Okay.
And Nietzsche's complaint was basically a complaint against the uh, dignity-based outcroppings that he was noticing. The general behavior of the Germans was beginning to be more and more dignity-based,
Hmm.
more altruistically inclined in certain circumstances, more pacific, generally speaking, uh, but within the context of an honor-based nationalistic fervor.
Mhm. Yeah,
He didn't like either of those two things. Nietzsche didn't like the nationalistic fervor, and he didn't like the the uh, the the tendencies that he saw within the population, and those were dignity-based tendencies.
yeah, yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah. Um, well, yeah, it's a good case study, I think, Germany. I've always thought Germany, like historically, has been a kind of an anomaly and sort of s- something we've struggled to integrate into our story of progress and story of world history because they are, on one hand, like before World War II, more of an honor-based society. They have a lot of the sensibilities which are opposed to dignity-based cultures, but they are also an example of people that are deeply introspective, that were scientifically very advanced at the time, that are have complex social, legal, political systems and so forth. So they were kind of a contradiction in this sense because they were sort of able to incorporate certain political, legal, economic, scientific forms of progress that were coming out of dignity-based societies, but they were sort of mixing that with maybe a kind of psychology or a culture of more honor-based attributes,
Yeah.
and there seems to be a
And
tension with that.
there's no problem doing that. In fact, the healthiest countries are those that have managed to get a proper combination of honor-based and dignity-based traits.
Hmm.
No one is suggesting that either honor-based take over the entire show or dignity-based take over the entire show. The healthy states in the world are those that have both traits, but one trait just sticks out more than the other traits do. So
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
they have somewhat more dignity-based traits, and so we call them dignity-based. They have constitutions that are dignity-based, so we call them dignity-based on that account.
Hmm. So it's a real shame in many ways that like what happened to Germany in 20th century, because it could have been a really good example of a healthier balance than
Yeah,
the more extremes which we see
yeah.
um
In fact,
kind
that's what
of
Nietzsche was
after.
complaining against
Yeah.
was that balance,
Mm. Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's where I have my harshest criticism of him is because there was a good balance between honor-based and dignity-based traits, and he was arguing against both of them at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Nietzsche is funny too because he's sort of a contradiction in himself because he is a obviously he has very honor-based sensibilities, and he very much doesn't like the very egalitarian sense of you should respect everyone and you should sort of give everyone a kind of sense of rights and human rights and so forth. But he's also a philosopher, so he's deeply introspective, he's deeply thoughtful, and he's not particularly he's not easily like any philosopher really is not that easily just sort of going with the flow of social sensibilities, contemporary
Yeah,
social sensibilities, and
right.
trying to get cheap status here and there and just playing the game of social hierarchy. He's too thoughtful for all of that. But at the
Yeah,
same
I put
time,
my finger on myself.
yeah, I think anyone who does these podcasts is pretty much like that. It's like it's you don't really want to play the cheap game of social status, but at the same time, sometimes people recognize that there is a value um, to better social integration and better and also pride. I mean, just pride in who you are as a people. There's no point in feeling kind of negative about yourself the whole time. Um, One advantage being Irish is that because of it's kind of because we're a small country, but because we have a history of having a revolutionary war of independence and then getting a republic, there was an extension of, I would say, pride in our national identity, which I always thought was distinct if I met English people or French people or German people or Scandinavian people or whoever. I always noticed that there was a sort of a certain pride we had in our national identity and in our kind of international reputation, which other people weren't sort of indulging in. They were more critical of their own country and more critical of
Yeah,
their identity and so forth. So I thought
and
that was always
Ireland
strange.
has a very nice mixture of honor-based and dignity-based traits.
Yeah, but the problem with us is we did have that when I was growing up in the country. So I was born in 1993. So when I was growing up in the country, that was very much the case. It was quite a good mixture. It was the country was center right, I would say politically, culturally, it was more conservative than the other Western countries. Um, but we still had good, like the same, like legal systems, and we had the same kind, accountability processes. And they weren't always perfect. There was corruption in the police, for example, until very recently. But we had more, we were moving in a direction of accountability and fairness that you often don't get in maybe more traditional honor cultures. But then it got imbalanced, you see. Then we started to kind of hyper liberalize very, very quickly in the past 10, 15 years. And now we're sort of in this phase of imbalance and everyone's become kind of excessively dignity based in these sort of pathological ways we've been discussing. So it's gotten imbalanced. But we did have a good balance about 20, 30 years ago. But yeah. Um
By the way, you were mentioning status, and the status is interesting. Status is by some people, Henry Sumner Maine, the English historian of law, said that culture develops from status to contract.
yeah, yeah.
And that's very interesting. The dignity based or contract oriented. Uh, you have to have a certain amount of faith in the system of government to have faith in contracts. Now,
Yeah.
if somebody violates contract, you have to have the faith that somebody is going to be holding your back up, and faith and acceptance and inherent dignity are the three primary uh, terms that describe a dignity-based society. Whereas respect, trust, and earned worth are what describe an honor-based society. So
Mm,
an honor-based society is known for its hierarchical organization and for its emphasis on status,
mm,
which is very much subdued in the dignity-based societies.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's one thing I do think is a really good criticism of the honor-based societies against the dignity-based societies is the over-reliance on contract. Because there's a lot of situations where you need trust building and you need kind of more organic respect building to build up slowly. And it
Sure.
seems like the dignity-based cultures are more contractual, and they're sort of like they kind of flatten everything out to contractual, reciprocal, which also means transactional, which means market-based, often relationships between people. And often you do just need the good old-fashioned slow trust building of particular relationships that just sort of
Yeah.
organically play out. Because I really think I do personally, this is a very much like an honor personality trait in me. It's like I really don't like when I'm expected to respect people too quickly. Now, of course, I'll be polite and civil, and I'm not going to be unnecessarily offensive to anybody. But if you're expected in like a workplace, for example, university, for example, you're to like respect this person for whatever reason, and in this very special way, in a very protective way, and it's I always felt very sort of uncomfortable with that. It's like, no, can I just get to know them and then maybe I'll respect them or maybe I won't. Like we'll see how it goes, you know? It's like if you
Uh,
date somebody, if you're like on a date with a woman, it's like, I can't contractually say if I'm gonna like her or not. We have to go on a few dates first, you know? So like there's a kind of need to kind of ground things in more organic, kind of natural, slow building um relationships. Actually, an interesting thing about Germany actually is that in Germany, um, people, it's a typical thing if you compare like England to Germany, for example. In England, people are more open to you immediately, but they're sort of harder to, I think, build like long-term good relationships with. Whereas in Germany's more of examples where at first people are maybe a bit more defensive, a bit more distant, but over time people open up more. And then so you have this kind of like temporality of that sort
yeah,
of
you have
trust
that in
building.
Japan. You have that in Japan also.
So you're saying Japan's more like the German model is slow
Yeah,
opening?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. They were still coming to contracts as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Good. Um, is there
They have
any
a pretty
is
distinct combination of honor and dignity-based traits. Japan does, and
mhm,
I think it does them well. But one of the dignity-based aspects of it is that the population is getting older, and they're having a shortage of labor associated with that. But they have this thing about purity of culture, so they don't want to have
oh,
any immigration at all. In fact, they keep the Ainu, who are related to them, up in a Northern Ireland, no, Northern Ireland, uh, so that they don't have to worry about dealing with them. So the Ainu are non-compos menace, as it were, even though they're genetically related.
Mm.
So Japan wants to be a very pure, homogeneous society, but they're paying for that in a very desperate way now, and
Yeah,
they're at odds and evens as to how to get out of this problem.
uh, yeah, exactly. Have you given any thought to how this might relate to the birth gap problem and the aging population problem? Like, is there any kind of cultured dignity, honor, sense of like this the tension or characteristics that are playing into that, do you think? Or
Well, the dignity-based countries are the ones that see the lower birth rate, but there's an economic factor involved in it as well. So it's not just the dignity-based; it's uh, uh, the dignity base comes in when you have women who demand to work, and dignity says yes, let the women work,
mm,
and the honor base say no, leave the women in the kitchen, the men will work.
mm,
Uh, but the women going to work means that there's less fertility on that basis alone, let alone anything else. And we know that by and large, as the economy improves in a country, the birth rate goes down.
mm,
And uh, standard of living goes up, the birth rate goes down. And as the standard of living goes up, that's generally speaking due to dignity-based factors.
yeah. It's just weird because you do have a lot of honor-based societies that also have quite bad birth rate problems, like Japan or Italy. I'm not sure where Italy stands in this, but Japan is an example. Italy, um, Korea, they're quite bad. So it does seem like definitely something which both sides are quite exposed to. I think the only places that don't have them are basically like North Africa and certain parts of Islam are like the only parts of the world that have like above two ratio to birth replenishment rates. So it's a bit of a mystery.
Yeah, and those are honor-based countries by and large.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. But it's also to do with, I think it's also to do with male polygamy because male polygamy in North Africa is accepted and by and large, and in Islamic countries, it's more regulated, obviously with like marital laws and so forth. But like rich men, for example, can have like multiple wives,
Yeah,
whereas the rest of the world has pretty much gone into a monogamous um, framework. And I actually personally think that that might have something to do with the birth cap problem. Is the way we handle monogamy. But I suppose that you could relate monogamy itself to dignity cultures because there is a sensibility of dignity within monogamy. I mean, the sort
yeah.
of dedication and respect to the individual that you're with and so forth. Um, okay. Let's see. Do I have any other questions? I'm pretty much out of the other questions. I don't know if there's any other topics you want to talk about. Maybe contemporary geopolitics. We touched on it earlier. I wanted to kind of bring up Trump a little bit at some point in the conversation.
Let me
Um,
talk for a little bit about Russia, Ukraine, and Israel and
okay.
Palestine.
Yeah.
Uh, Russia and Palestine are honor-based, and Ukraine uh, is mixed honor-based and dignity-based, and Israel is, for the most part, dignity-based. The one thing about honor-based societies is enjoy being uh, they don't enjoy having somebody hold them in contempt. They're very sensitive to that. And
And
the
what do you
Palestinians,
mean by holding contempt exactly?
there's a saying amongst a certain percentage of Israelis that any Israeli is worth 1,000 Palestinians.
Okay. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that is a measure of contempt to the Palestinians.
Okay. I see. Yeah.
And the apartheid-like control that Israel has exerted is its own measure, a show of contempt for the Palestinians.
Mhm.
And Palestinians are honor-based to the hilt, and any honor-based country is going to react very strongly against that kind of demonstration of contempt.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why Hamas went to Unabombers and then uh, Iranian missiles and then the massacre. Um, they 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 were reacting to the constant contempt,
Mm,
and Israel should have known that, and Israel could have reacted differently toward them and erased that measure that produced all the violence, because that violence was contempt related
mhm,
due to the fact that the Palestinians are very honor based. So Israel was lacking in their cultural etiquette in many
mm,
ways.
yeah,
They
yeah,
could have avoided a lot of that by being uh, supportive
yeah.
of the Palestinians.
Yeah, I've sort of just to go to the Russia thing, I've sort of noticed something similar with Russia because it's very clear that they do feel kind of excluded from like they're not considered like proper Europeans or proper, they're sort of considered like the other Europeans. Um, and they have certainly held on to I think I do think after the Soviet Union fell that they wanted to integrate more into this sort of dignity, not the dignity base necessarily, but they wanted to integrate more into the kind of post-war like global order. And they tried to join NATO, for example,
Come with their own factions that liked that idea and factions that didn't like that idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Conservative factions did not like that idea, and the conservative factions in an honor-based country are usually going to win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And but I do think even what would have been more helpful would have been to, I suppose, as you're saying, the same thing as with the Palestinians, like to for dignity-based cultures to be able to empathize with perspective of an honor-based society more. Um, it does often seem like there's certain traits which make it obvious. Like one example is Putin never speaks English in public, even though he can speak English. Like he never speaks, he always speaks Russian or has a translator. And it's very clear that they have a strong sense of, yes, we want to join the international order. Well, for a time they did, or at least certain factions in the society did. But we want to also hold on to some fundamental characteristics that are particular to us and kind of that we are proud of and part of our ethnic identity, national identity, and so forth, and our history, and to be proud of our history and so forth. And I do think one unfortunate thing about the post-war kind of liberal order, and this might actually be because of what happened with Germany, and they're sort of trying to take the model of Germany and then sort of expand it to the rest of the world is that they're sort of saying, yes, you can be involved in their international order, but you sort of have to feel a kind of guilt or a shame or a kind of you have to sort of sacrifice the pride in your own people and in your own history and your own country. And I think that the Russians are very averse to that. Very, very averse to that.
Yeah. Well, in Russia, you've got another basic problem. Uh, there's one thing to want to be a, 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 a working factor with the not a part of necessarily, but a working factor with the European community. But there's also a tendency in honor-based countries to want to make their presence felt. They want to put their stamp on the world scene, and that unfortunately is very typical of Russia. So Russia is caught between a rock and a hard place there. Their behavior is not particularly appropriate for the Europeans to bring them in under happy terms.
Yeah.
And their demandingness is not something that is approved by the dignity-based people.
Mhm. Yeah.
Russia comes across as demanding that they be treated equally to all of the bigger countries, whereas Russia, in fact, has an economy as small as Italy's.
Mhm. Yeah.
They're lucky to have oil, and they put all their money in the military at the expense of their public. This is because they want to do something to put their mark on the rest of the world. And if they
mm,
can't join Europe, they will do it militarily. And
mm,
this, of
mm,
course, scares the wits out of the Europeans.
mm,
So there's a lot going on here on both sides.
yeah, yeah. It's just the unfortunate situation now of a failure of cooperation has led to them making a new sort of pact with like countries like China and whatever South America and so forth. So there's a kind of world order creating now being created outside of the original world order. There's a kind of counter world order, you know. Um, but okay, so what about Trump? Because Trump is an interesting phenomena in this context because he's certainly someone who's obviously he's from a dignity society and so forth, but he really breaks with the kind of decorum and personality expectations of the typical sort of post-war, you know,
Yeah,
elites that are
he
very
really does.
much.
He's very honest.
So
Very.
do you
In
see?
fact, in fact, he rules as a Cadillo would rule, and a Cadillo was a basic feature of South American politics for hundreds of years. The Cadillo was a tough rider. The Cadillo, he and his companions would ride on horseback, which is the reason why they call it Cadillo style government. They don't use the horses anymore, but you've got a leader who has his minions, and the minions are completely dependent on him, and they do whatever he tells them to do.
Mm,
Period. And he doesn't mind it if they do a little bit rough. That's a Cadillo government. Well,
mm,
that's exactly the government that Trump has got, and he has forced the hand of the Supreme Court to give him the powers that now allow him to be a Cadillo figure. He
mm,
has complete control of the central government,
mm.
just like a dictator would. He has complete control of it.
And he, um,
He
yeah,
has more control of it than FDR had. FDR had quite a
yeah.
lot of control, but he's got more control now than FDR had.
But do you think just in terms of the
He can
populations?
single-handedly tell a university, "I will dismiss your funding if you
Yeah, yeah,
don't stop doing things." He's
yeah,
himself into place in all kinds of quagmires that had nothing to do with his position as an officer in the presidency.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
He's, he's eliminated all the guardrails.
it, one interesting thing about him is that, for example, like if I went to visit America now, the US, even for a holiday, like I would need to show my social media history to get into the country, because anyone who's said anything on social media now that's a bit provocative or offensive to the Trump regime is now treated in a very petty way, like they're a threat to national security, have to be deported. So it's very strange I never would have guessed that problem would emerge in my lifetime. So the problem with Trump is that like he's quite petty. I find him. He gets really caught up over very personal little things. I don't know if you recently saw he was at a factory. He was visiting a factory somewhere in the US, and one of the workers shouted something at him. The worker didn't like him. They shouted something at him, and instead of just ignoring it like most politicians would do, he stopped and he gave the worker the middle finger and kept walking.
You know,
And I was like, this is bad imagery because this isn't like he can give Hillary Clinton the middle finger. He could give, he could give like this some journalist for CNN the middle finger, and people would perceive that as him being rebellious and sticking it to the man. He's giving like a factory worker the middle finger. I kind of thought, well, like that seems
you know.
it's bad
Well,
optics, bad optics.
hunter-based people are thin-skinned, and he is especially thin-skinned.
Yeah. Yeah. He's very thin-skinned. And unfortunately, I feel like in the world of mass media, being thick-skinned is helpful because you're always going to get people making fun of you and attacking you, and you kind of need to be able to
Yeah,
endure that, you know?
yeah. I didn't even know that policy that you just brought up. That's news to me, but doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
Because there was a guy from Sweden who was visiting America, I think like a year ago or something, and he had a meme of JD Vance on his phone. And he wasn't allowed in the country. He got sent back home. Like, so it was, and everyone's kind of shocked by this because it's like it seems so petty. It seems like a very
In other words,
thin-skinned
yeah,
government.
where's the free speech that the Republicans constantly bicker about?
Well, there you
They're
go.
violating free speech on their own
Yeah, yeah,
through its policies.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's it is quite difficult for people now, I think, because on one hand, the very superficial and false imagery of the sort of post-war politician who was very professional and very enlightened and educated, that became very fake and very flawed and very manipulative in some ways. But now you have this opposite, which is the thin-skinned politician who's lashing out at people the whole time in this very sort of petty way. And
The Cadillo ruler that was so prominent in South America, uh, uh, Trump fits all of the criteria for that
yeah,
type of, and so one would be one would be truthful in suggesting that he is a third world dictator. He's not too far from it.
uh, well, that's I think one of the reasons why the European politicians have the relations between Europe and America have gone very sour very quickly. I thought they would go sour eventually, but I didn't think it would be this quick. And I think one of the reasons is the European politicians are still very much within that post-war in your framework kind of dignity culture, post-war, professional, technocratic um kind of caricature. And
Yeah.
Trump, like they just don't know how to deal with Trump. Like they don't want to have a meeting with him, they don't want to have a phone call with him because they just don't know how to deal with him. He's just too weird to them, you know? He's too he's too different from everything they've ever dealt with, you know? So they're avoiding, and that's going to lead to a much quicker breakdown in the international relations between Europe and the US because and it's not even for like big picture political reasons to do with like what do you think of freedom or the economy or something like these big picture. It'll be to do with like actually quite stuff to do with like social decorum and social interaction. They're just like a
And
breakdown of it.
Trump couldn't care less that they don't like to talk to him. He couldn't care less.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Let them be.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
deal with them.
exactly. Well, what do you think of the Greenland situation now? Because Trump seems to want to take Greenland, and the Europeans have now moved troops into Greenland. Not a lot of troops. They've moved like less than 100 in there, but they've moved some troops into Greenland to protect it. And Trump is saying he wants to just take
Well,
it. So,
the issue is whether Trump is using his tough language as a ploy to get very good terms in getting mining over there, because the
yeah,
whole purpose of getting Greenland is for mining rare earth metals. That's the only reason he has any interest in Greenland at all. But it's also the reason why China and another country have an interest in Greenland.
yeah, yeah,
China's got the 70% of the world's supply of rare earth metals, and she's not even satisfied with that. She's going after Greenland. She's got a, 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 a company over there already that's doing some digging.
yeah, yeah,
And of course, Trump doesn't want to have anything to do with that. He would just
yeah.
assume that they left, and so in order to keep everybody else out, he figures he needs to be the only one in. And if that means taking over Greenland, then that's what it means.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's just interesting how it's handled because I feel like the same situation could have happened 10 years ago, and there's a similar response would have been had. Like the Europeans would have put some troops in. The Americans probably would have kept surveilling from the distance, but keep an eye on the Chinese, what they're doing. But it's the way it's handled now and expressed is completely different. It's no longer like it's kind of private and it's professional and it's public and it's we're gonna take it and it's ours and it's very provocative and it's very inflammatory. It's a completely different style of kind of public performance now that's going on with politics since Trump. And I think that's really difficult for people to sort of deal with. I think that I don't know if you see interesting thing to bring up. I don't know if you've seen Emmanuel Macron. And the French have always maintained that. Again, I was saying Ireland earlier has a bit used to have a bit more national pride than other Western countries. France also, I think, is an example of that, where there's a bit more national pride there. And it's very important for the French president to not seem weak. Okay, against his own people, he can seem weak, but against other geopolitical rivals, he can't seem too weak. So if you've seen Macron give Trump handshakes, the handshakes last like 20 minutes because
Yeah,
they're doing this like power battle. They're
yeah.
shaking their hands and they're like, no, 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 I'm not going to give up. You give up. I'm not going to give up. And they're like tapping each other on the shoulder, but in obviously a very aggressive way, even though it's like it's meant to be like, friendly, but it's very aggressive. And they're doing this like really funny kind of song and dance of a power play, and Macron is trying to stand up to him. Um, it kind of encapsulates the relationship now between the US and Europe, like friendly but also aggressive at the same time. It's very
Passive
strange.
aggressive.
Yeah, sort of passive aggressive. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, Okay, good. We've been talking for a good hour and 20 minutes or so. So I don't know, is there any other topic you want to bring up, or do you want to end it?
Well, I'm at the end of my notes here.
Okay. Okay, well that's fine then. I'll hit. Oh, do you have any just for people listening, where can they find your work? Where can they go to read your essays or
That would go to charlesherman.substack.com.
okay.